Let us begin. Thank you once again for being here this morning. I know when there's an opening cocktail, the next morning is a little bit more difficult, but I could see you are here and you're wide awake. We will begin a session that it will be very busy. We have 90 minutes to cover this interesting topic. For the new participants, I won't explain everything, but I want to make sure to let you know that the keynote speakers will be speaking in French and in English. If you need headsets, they are available just outside the room. We are now in session 5 of our symposium that will cover statistical tools for a national outlook. After the break, we will look at the international outlook. I'll now invite Philippe Champy, who is Inspector General of Cultural Affairs with the Ministry of Culture and Communications of France and Associate Researcher with the Innovation and Regulation in Digital Service Chair. He was also in charge of a prospective mission and also advisor for regulation and industry. He was associate professor and lecturer in cultural industry economics. He worked at the universities de Panthéon, Assas, Saint-Denis, Toulouse, Capitole, Sciences. He is the author of Révolution numérique et industrie culturelle, published with La Découverte in 2010, and Économie des jeux vidéo at La Documentation Française. Monsieur Champy will take a few minutes to give his own point of view on this theme, and then he will act as moderator. Good morning, everyone. I will try to be brief in order to leave more time for our keynote speakers. A few words on our department that I led a few years ago. I would like to share with you how we've led our work on cultural statistics. That department was created in the 1960s. It was specialized in the whole question of cultural statistics. It was quite innovative. We created the first studies on cultural practices and on the economic analysis of the cultural sector. One thing that was specific to this department is that in France, each ministry has their own ministry statistics department that works with INSEE, the National Institute of Statistics and Economic Studies. And the department, Statistical Services, has access to all the data, and there's processing that is done by INSEE or by our own department of all the national data, which could be useful to measure the cultural economics, that is. It's also something that could be useful for the National Institute. At two opportunities, we worked at the European level. We had a little bit more experience than other organizations, and we tried to foster the development of European cultural statistics under Marc Nicolas, the former chief. We wanted to create in all of Europe a common approach to the cultural universe and cultural activities throughout Europe. Therefore, we created a first framework in the year 2000, which was shared among all European countries to have comparable data, for one, and to have regular access to up-to-date statistics to analyze the cultural sector. When I was head of the department, we did this effort a second time because the European Union, that is, had more states, and we wanted to for each state to be able to produce full sets of statistics on culture. We had a working group that was called USSNet that included Luxembourg. But with each state, we created a working group that looked at the cultural field. And that was a sensitive issue. We wanted to know if we agreed on what was cultural and what wasn't cultural, to have a common framework to make sure that our work was aligned. All the results of our work are available online. We continued our work on the economy, on jobs, and on cultural practices. Now, unfortunately, this work is a little bit outdated. We'll have to repeat this work. And we regularly had a survey on cultural practices. The most recent goes back to 2008. Unfortunately, these studies aren't very frequent. Our practices have become more frequent with the digital era. With the work underway, especially with the research areas and with universities and the academic work, we want to see what were the tools that would be necessary for the next study, to know what are the cultural practices and what are the digital practices, and to examine the relationship between both. My time is up. I will now hand over the floor to our panelists. Our panelists will draw the portrait of issues that concern national statistics, to analyze the cultural sector and the digital issues. We will start with Mr. Komi Ati, who is a cultural administrator with the National Film Directorate of the Ministry of Communication. He has worked on statistics in the film industry and on audiovisual statistics. Thank you, Mr. Chantipi. I'd like to thank the UNESCO's Institute for Statistics for giving me this opportunity. I am not a statistician by training, but my work and my research has led to reliable statistics on African cinema. Unfortunately, we have a crying lack of statistics in this industry. In my presentation, we will look at the state of the film industry in the digital era. We will take a specific case of Nigerian cinema, which we call Nollywood. This has its references. And in the third portion, we will look at the digital technology as a remedy for African cinema. First part of my presentation, the portrait of African cinema. We'll start with production. Producing movies is expensive, which is the case in Africa. According to studies led by the WAEM, a film can cost between 300 million to 500 million CFA francs, which would vary between 457,000 euros to 762,000 euros. They are expensive. Post-production and laboratories for film production are outside Africa, and this has a heavy burden on the final cost of production. An example of a film in which 60% of the expenses are done in France. Now for distribution, West African cinema, French-speaking in the most part, has a lack of international visibility because distribution companies do not play a dynamic role in the film distribution. And they just become relays for other distribution companies, mainly based in Europe. There's also the movie theater crisis. Almost all movie theaters have disappeared. And what also affected this distribution was the depreciation of the CFA franc, which is the currency used between the sub-Saharan French-speaking African countries. All this led to a reconversion of distribution companies in movie theater operators. Consequently, there's a French operator called Métropolitain that works in Côte d'Ivoire and in Senegal that works for the profit of the CFA group and also the Ivory Coast operator Cosifilm. for operation, there's a desertion of movie theaters, and this forces operators, because of a lack of return on investment, to no longer invest in renovating the technical material in movie theaters. Here is a quick analysis of the Union nationale des exploitants du cinéma du Sénégal. At the box office, the earnings are around 10 million CFA francs. If we deduct the expenses that are around 10 million CFA francs, so the return on investment is practically zero. For distribution has its own issues. The first issue is the disappearing of movie theaters. Films are rarely seen by African audiences because these movie theaters are disappearing. The conditions are outdated and the rooms are not welcoming. If we look at Togo, they have 17 rooms that became art house places, and also other were transformed into boutiques and other forms of commerce. The second issue with distribution is the drop in visits to movie theaters. If we look at the statistics from la Société nationale de distribution et d'exploitation cinématographique du Burkina Faso, over the period spanning from 1995 to 2000, the drop was of 52%. Another unfavorable element is piracy. If you take the FESPACO in 2013, the Film and Television Festival of Ouagadougou, the motion pictures are sold at 100 CFA francs to be seen on a mobile device, which is almost 15 euro cents. There is also the increase of video cassette clubs in communities. And bootlegging is also something that is added to piracy. Piracy hinders the efforts of producers and directors who cannot make their activities profitable. But in the West African space, there's one example we should not forget. The example of Nigerian cinema, also called Nollywood. Nollywood is the Nigerian film industry. Nigeria is the second largest producers of films after Bollywood, followed by the US and Hollywood. According to a study of the GDP in Nigeria in 2014, Nollywood represents 2% of the Nigerian GDP and creates 300,000 direct jobs. Again, Nollywood and some figures. What are the underlying factors of Nollywood's success? Nollywood has invested massively in video production to limit production costs. There's also multilingualism. About 56% of Nigerian films are produced in the national languages, which pleases a lot of the audiences. This is a pie chart to show you the importance of languages in film production in Nigeria. Nigerian cinema is also bootlegged. This bootleg has been encouraged by digital technologies. According to the World Bank, for each copy sold, 9 are illegal. There's also streaming. the illegal multiplication of DVDs rented by video clubs. However, there are solutions to these issues. Nigerians have came up with interesting solutions. Recently, they've turned towards VOD with Iroko partners. It is important to raise awareness on the dangers of piracy. There's also source identification codes that are implemented by the Nigerian government. The last portion of my presentation is on digital technologies as a remedy for African cinema, especially French-speaking West African cinema. The role that states should play. States should implement control structures and legislative recommendations. In my country, we don't have a cinema code, unfortunately. We're working on it. We've been working on it for a certain time now. We also must implement a support fund to film production. Senegal has its own production fund that represents about 1.5 million euros for distribution and dissemination. Distribution of computer files with an identification code. But for distribution, we need large bandwidth to be able to broadcast these films electronically. We have new forms of film operation and spectator practices. One of our priorities is to make our movie theaters digital. We practically have no more movie theaters, and the ones that remain have to be converted to digital technologies. The conversion is very expensive. It costs between 7,000 to 10,000 euros just to to update the movie theaters, and around 15,000 to completely renovate movie theaters. In Senegal, we have a company that is called Son SA that implemented the concept of Africa Films and Mobicine. The concept of Africa Film is distribution of films by internet, and Mobicine concept, which is a project that wants to renew the visit of movie theaters in Africa. We also need a French-speaking film festival that would not compete against the Film and Television Festival of Ouagadougou. And all this could contribute to the success of the film industry in Africa. Finally, we have to promote traveling cinema. Traveling cinema are films that are carried to local communities. This allows populations to get used to public presentation of movies. In Africa, the population is not necessarily used to the projection of films publicly. We hope that traveling cinema will increase this practice. We have two projects to do this, which are Cinéma Numérique Ambulant and Mobicine in Senegal and Mali. These projects include 15 mobile units of film projection. They project movies in rural settings and also in impoverished neighborhoods and urban zones. Here are a few details on the CNA. We also have the Mobicine project in schools that wants to allow youth to discover films, all while creating jobs and strengthening the financial capacity of producers. This was a project launched in 2011 that is ongoing, and it allows students to be exposed to movies. We have trouble in Africa bringing culture to students. With this Mobi Ciné program, we hope that culture will penetrate the school establishments. In conclusion, digital technologies are a must for the African film industry. We think we have a lot of awareness raising to do, and we have to lobby our decision makers to invest in the digital technologies. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'll ask now Alexandre Fernandez Barbosa, who's director of the Regional Center for Studies in Development of Information in Brazil, to take the floor so that he can explain to us their own approach.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. C'est toujours un grand plaisir.
Good morning to everybody. I'm always very pleased to be invited and come back to HEC Montreal, and I have beautiful memories of the time I spent in 2006 and 2007 as a student here. So I'm really pleased to be here with you.
Me to speak in this very relevant conference for policies in cultural arena. And I will share this presentation with my colleague Fabio Seni, who is coordinating a project on indicators to measure the use of digital content mediated by ICT. So as you saw yesterday, the broad nature of culture makes measuring very difficult. And we are going to share with you a very new project that we have at CETIC to measure how Brazilians, citizens, are accessing and use digital culture on the web, and also how organizations from the cultural activity is offering digital content for Brazilians. Let me start by asking, what is the importance of measuring the access and use of digital culture mediated by the new digital technologies? And I'm going to use two internationally agreed agenda to discuss the importance of measurement. One is the World Summit on the Information Society, that there is action lines regarding culture, and also the Sustainable Development Agenda, which was recently approved by United Nations, and we have 17 goals, and also we have targets related to education and culture. Well, to discuss and to measure digital content on the web, it is important to understand supply side and demand side, and to have very specific indicators that will allow policymakers to understand the consumption of digital content, and also from the supply side, the availability of cultural content on the web, like museums, archives, library, movies, etc. And measurement, of course, matters to many actors for different reasons. In terms of cultural policy agenda, how we can close the measurement agenda to be aligned with the policy agenda. In Brazil, this initiative is supported by the Ministry of Culture, UNESCO, and other key stakeholders from civil society and academics, researchers. And the main aim is to understand the importance of aspects for social inclusion, digital inclusion, and cultural inclusion through the ICTs. And to get a perfect alignment with the measurement agenda and policy agenda, it is necessary to produce reliable data, reliable statistics that are policy relevant, that are timely to inform policy decisions, that are accessible to our key stakeholders, that are cost-effective, and of course, that considers the cross-cutting nature of ICTs. And also that preferably that those data and those statistics are internationally comparable. And here, I just would like to highlight three important data sources. Yesterday, we had a very interesting discussion on big data, and of course, that administrative data are key for policymaking, but they are not enough. It is important to have survey data to capture how not only citizens are using digital content, cultural digital content on the web, but also how organizations are offering barriers, motivations, etc., and also big data. We are now starting with the survey, both supply side and demand side. This is just to show that as a UNESCO center with mandate in Latin America and the Lusophone countries of Africa, we have cultural mandate to help those countries to understand how culture is being used on the web. And here we have a series of surveys. We started producing data on ICT. Those are standalone ICT surveys nationwide, including rural areas in the country. We started in 2005 with a Ict Household Survey. And culture, as maybe you are not able to read it, but this is the newest project that we have. So in the below part of this diagram, we have data production, ICT statistics, and on the top, you see on the yellow box, policies that were based on those data. And you may be thinking that we are producing more data than policymakers are able to actually use in the policymaking process. This is a challenge, and the way that we find to make policymakers be more familiar with ICT statistics is to engage them in the production process. And with this, I would like to pass the floor to Fabio that will give you a little bit more information on the project.
Thank you, Alexandre. Bonjour, good morning. Thanks a lot for the invitation to be here. I would like to present here some of our latest efforts in producing data to inform cultural policies in Brazil. And first of all, as Alexandre said, Ict Household Surveys provided some very important background information on the internet penetration and the consumption of digital goods and services in Brazil. First of all, you have two main household surveys that we do since 2005. The first one is the Ict Households, that you have one publication here, aimed at individuals with 10 years or more, and the Ict Kids Online, based on an European project that's now going global, the Global Kids Online project, that measures the penetration, the consumption of internet between 9 to 17 years old children. So, following the best practices for the production of official statistics, Statistical, both surveys have representative samples of internet users, so you can address issues such as location of use, online activities, and ICT skills. So here you can see some data from the Ict Household Survey, which shows us, for instance, the increase in the number of internet users in Brazil, and the fast dissemination of mobile devices. So you can see here that now we have more than 94 million internet users in Brazil, which means 55% of the population. And we have 47% of the population using the internet through mobile phones. So a very rapid and fast-changing scenario of use in Brazil. Here is also important to highlight the profile of the internet user and the huge inequalities that we have in internet access. So if you see that disaggregated data shows that more internet users are present among children and young people, which you can see here. The inequality among socioeconomic status, the huge inequalities in the access to internet, and the inequality between urban and rural areas, as you can see here. We can also see that within the users, online activities are also age-oriented, even if within the users. So young people also lead among the internet users. So here we selected one of the main activities that we measure cultural activities that we measure in the ICT household. So watching videos, downloading music, and posting self-created content. Here you can see the important presence of children and young people performing these activities. Now, I would like to finalize by sharing some information about the ICT in Cultural Survey project that Alexandre mentioned already. And facing the complexity of producing data on culture, we decided to start by implementing a qualitative methodology in order to understand the factors that influence the consumption of cultural products offline and online. And after that, we plan to design quantitative surveys aimed at the demand and supply of cultural goods and services. And CETIC is also developing projects using big data and data analytics, which can complement the survey data in order to produce more comprehensive cultural statistics for policymakers. So we are working through the importance of complementary methods, and we believe that the survey process must engage data users at the national level. So this is how our main process works. We have a multi-stakeholder group of experts that participate actively on the planning phase and the data analysis of our survey. So here you can see that during the planning phase and the data analysis, we keep together this group of experts that helps us to define all the methodology of the survey. And regarding the assessment of how individuals consume digital culture, we have just conducted data collection for the qualitative approach, which was composed by 24 focus groups in the 5 regions, capital and countryside, different age groups, educational level, and socioeconomic status. And we are planning to develop in 2017 a module on ICT households that we are going to improve the survey to have quantitative data on the use by individuals. And another important objective of this project is to provide information on the supply side. So we are planning here in 2016 to start a survey on the use of ICT by cultural organizations, following the classification proposed by UNESCO, Framework for Cultural Statistics from 2009. And the objective is to evaluate how cultural equipment, such as museums, libraries, and movie theaters, are using ICT for the digitization of cultural heritage, management, and dissemination. So here the project has these 2 parts, the parts on how individuals consume culture and how organizations are using ICT to develop their main missions. So finally, I would like to share some dimensions that emerged from the preliminary results of the qualitative phase. So during these 24 focus groups that we have across Brazil, we saw that internet plays a key role in providing access to cultural services and goods. So we have lots of people talking about content that they don't have access and now they have. So access is a very important element of the internet. We also saw the ICT applications and platforms did influence how individuals choose cultural content and consumed, especially audiovisual content. And that is an important issue in terms of the promotion of diversity. The individuals tend to maximize the access to free content and there is a lack of knowledge about how cultural goods and services are produced and distributed. So it's a very important policy issue that we might understand in terms of the economics of culture. And in terms of the content creation and the more creative and symbolic aspect of the culture, internet is still not perceived as a space for production and creation of cultural goods. And there is and also there is a lack of knowledge in Brazil about copyright issues and how to deal with that online. So this is one of the few of the main results that we have in the qualitative phase. So now we are preparing a questionnaire and sample design to start developing the quantitative phase. And we hope to have recent data to present by the end of the year. So that's it. Thank you, merci beaucoup. And we hope to have...
Merci pour votre présentation.
So thank you for your presentation. Now we will welcome Lucy Chang, who is Chief of the Property Services, Advertising and Recreation and Culture Industry section in the Retail and Service Industries Division at Statistics Canada, as well as her colleagues Demi Kotsovas and Marc Urbach. As you wish.
Bonjour tout le monde.
So, good morning, everyone.
Thank you to our organizers for having us to present, and thank you for you guys for coming to listen to us, especially so early in the morning. We're going to be talking about how we measure digital culture products in Statistics Canada, and as you can see, the subject is very interesting and it affects various distinct areas within our agency, and in fact, we've had to work together in a partnership. I work with the Culture Satellite account, Lucy does the Culture Industry Surveys, and Mark is in a cost recovery area that does the demand side. Whoops. Jeez. Technology, right? Okay, so we're each going to be talking about our areas, and what I want to do is start with our conceptual framework and some definitions. So our framework is the Canadian Framework for Culture Statistics. It was developed in 2004 by Statistics Canada and in consultation with Canadian Heritage and various other culture stakeholders. It provides our standard concepts, definitions, and classifications in order for us to have comparable culture statistics. This was updated in 2011, and it was updated to be aligned with UNESCO. So we aligned our definitions and our industry structures in order to make us internationally comparable. So as economists and statisticians, we need definitions, or we like definitions so that we can measure something. So culture, and this is our short form definition, culture is the creative and artistic activity and the goods and services produced by it and the preservation of heritage. Now, a culture product is really the goods and services that result from these activities. For us, the culture product is format agnostic. That means we have physical and digital, which of course is our topic today. So how do we measure the digital products? What you see up here is our culture measurement framework. And in the center, this whole thing shows how the data flows within Statistics Canada. In the center, you have the Canadian macroeconomic accounts, and you have survey data and admin data that go into the macroeconomic accounts. And think of this as all the economic transactions in the Canadian economy. All the different sources get together. They're integrated, and there's a reconciliation going on. So, right. On the right-hand side, on the left, bottom right, bottom right, sorry, is the supply surveys, and this is what Lucy's going to cover. This is where all the culture industry surveys come in. I'm way at the top with the Culture Satellite account, and what we measure is the economic significance, importance of culture. In the Canadian economy, what we do is we go into those big economic transactions and we extract culture and say, okay, this is what culture is worth. We look at it, again, this is an economic measure, and an economic focus. So we focus on value added, or GDP, production, how much output we have from goods and services, and jobs. What's really interesting here is that the culture satellite account relies not just on the culture industry surveys, it relies on administrative data. And why I think this is really interesting and important is that it is a tool that we can use to try and measure any new products, emerging products, and activities. Now, digital culture products are included in there. Unfortunately, we can't separate it out from the physical format culture products. So now we will pass on to Lucy.
Thank you, Demi. So in this part of the presentation, I'll be focusing on the supply side, that is the culture industry surveys. Specifically, I'll talk about the work with the 9 surveys, culture surveys that Statistics Canada conducts in partnership with the Department of Canadian Heritage. These 9 surveys are conducted every 2 years, 5 of them 1 year, 4 of them the other. And they cover the publishing industries, the film, television, and video industries, and performing arts. Oops. The questionnaires for these surveys are all online at Statistics Canada, and from them you'll see that we collect the standard revenue and expense information. And in addition, we have a characteristics section where we ask our respondents for information specific to their industries. It is in this section where we collect information on the digital culture products. I've listed a few examples here of some of the questions relating to digital culture products from various culture industry surveys. And in the paper that we've written in Appendix B, it has a more complete list. So for example, we do ask the sound recording and music publishing companies to report on their sales and number of units sold by format, including digital musical recordings, and so forth. So most of these questions are relatively new questions that were added to the most recent surveys conducted in reference years 2013, 2014. And as we were developing these questions and collecting and processing them, we did find that we faced challenges with the measurement of digital culture products. One of those challenges relate to the classification systems. The basis for the reliable measurement of digital culture products is the industry and the product classification systems used. Their definitions must allow for similar businesses to be measured together, but that the products be segregated by format types, so we could parse out the digital component. Statistics Canada uses the North American Industry Classification Systems, NAICS 2012, to classify businesses in industries according to the main source of revenue, and in some cases according to the format of their products. So when the first North American Industry Classification System was developed, NAICS 1997, consumer digital technology was at its infancy. So at the time, activities that were exclusive to the internet were considered distinct industries and were classified accordingly. And the two NAICS, industry groups that captured these online activities for businesses that create and produce culture products and services were NAICS 51821, which is data processing, hosting, and related services, and 51913, which is internet publishing and broadcasting and web search portals. Relatively few businesses fell into these classifications at the time. However, as digital technology becomes more prevalent, more and more businesses are falling into these two industry groups, and they've now become just catch-alls for all things internet or online related, thereby really losing their effectiveness in terms of providing a relevant level of detail. For example, if I take the newspaper publishing industry, a newspaper publisher that once published physical newspapers will be categorized as in the newspaper publishing industry, but if they decide to then move their entire activity online, publishing only in digital format on the internet, then they would change the industry classification from newspaper publishers to one of the two catch-all categories that I mentioned before, the internet publishing and broadcasting and web search portals. So this business will no longer be categorized or included in the newspaper publishing industry solely because they've changed their method of publishing, even though they are inherently producing or providing the same good or service. So in order to accurately measure the economic activity of industries involved in the sale of digital products, the industry classification must be updated such that businesses are classified according to their main business activity regardless of the product format. And it's really the product classification system that should address the differences between the physical and digital formats. And at Statistics Canada, we are currently working on revising the industry classification to reflect this change for NAICS 2022. Now, for the product Statistics Canada uses the North American Product Classification Systems, NAPS 2012, and currently digital products are classified into several catch-all product groups. For example, NAPS 741 is online content, and it comprises of online news and information, internet radio subscription, online subscription games, and other online content. So for the measurement of digital culture products, the product classification system must group similar products by purpose and then subdivide them into digital and physical types as proposed on the slide. So we are currently completing the work to revise the product classification in time to reflect these changes for NAPS 2017. Okay. There are also some conceptual considerations and collection consideration, which I won't get into much detail here as my time is limited and I want to reserve time for Mark. But I do discuss them in the paper in further detail. But just briefly, we do see the need for clarification of concepts for both the users of our data as well as respondents to our surveys. Some conceptual issues, definitions of digital products versus digital transaction. We also found, users assuming that certain companies or, for example, streaming companies they assumed that they were included in the sound recording and music publishing industries when they're not. They're in the broadcasting industry. So we are working with the users to help them to understand the data that we have and how to use them. But in the respondent side, we also found some misunderstanding some concepts or differences in their understanding. For example, an understanding of how to report their sales or numbers on the digital products sold. In the sound recording and music publishing industry, the surveys asked these businesses for the number of digital musical recordings sold. And some respondents gave the number of unique digital recordings sold, while others provided the number of how many times these digital music recordings were downloaded. So you can see we have a varied response. So I'm going to skip over some things here, but as I said, if you can see on the slide, the poor response rate, consistency in response, and lagging collection all affect are all challenges that we face in producing reliable and timely estimates. So moving forward, as I said, we are in consultation with our respondents and stakeholders on the collection of information on digital culture products. We're working so that we would update our questionnaires to reflect the information needs of the stakeholders, but also to align the questions so that the industry can understand and respond to it. I'm going to just skip some things and pass my time off shortly to Mark.
Mark, please.
2 minutes. I got it. That's fine. All right, so I'm just going to quickly talk about some of the demand-side survey tools that we have at Statistics Canada to try and get at some of the purchase and consumption of digital culture products. My colleagues from Brazil spoke to the importance of this earlier. One of these tools is the Canadian Internet Use Survey. This is a survey tool. It was last run in 2012. Different versions of it have been run since 1997, so it provides quite a historic data set. It uses internationally comparable concepts and definitions as well. And this questionnaire, because it's built on a cost recovery basis, we build the questionnaire to answer relevant policy needs, revising content as necessary. There certainly are some challenges to this type of data collection, but it provides a valuable context and understanding of changing patterns, how Canadians are consuming cultural products. Some of the challenges I have outlined there, just the changing technology, just as we move forward, just having to revamp questionnaires to make sure that we are capturing concepts that people understand and also issues that are relevant to policymakers and Canadians. And then respondent recall, also an issue when we're asking for respondents to look back a year. It's very difficult for them sometimes to give us any type of, give an accurate measure, I should say, in terms of their consumption of digital products, both in cost and time, in terms of time. Just here, I won't really go through this here, just to give a flavor of some of the data that does come out of that survey, looking here at some of the cultural products that are consumed online. And right here, it's broken out by age categories, but there's also the opportunity to break it out by many other socioeconomic characteristics, by household type, by household income, and that sort of thing. Moving forward, addressing data gaps will continue to be a priority for us. The redesign of the household surveys, as there's emergence of new formats of content, things like podcasts that didn't really exist commercially when we when we designed the survey in 2010. And then finally, the digital economy measurement framework. This is an ongoing project at Statistics Canada, an assessment of the current state of measurement for the digital economy, and just an attempt to draw lines around what we are measuring at the agency related to the digital economy, which of course culture statistics plays a large role there. And I will stop it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pour conclure cette session et ensuite ouvrir un...
Conclude this section and to open up the mic for the questions, I'm welcoming our colleague, the Director of Statistics for the movie industry. And we will talk about the movie industry now.
Bonjour.
Good morning. Just a few words to explain what is our center as a preamble. It's a public institution of the Ministère de la Culture in France that is responsible for the financing of production in France. It's an old gentleman who's 7 years old, and since his creation, among his activities, he started producing statistics. So they started producing official statistics on the admission at the box office. They had a census of all the movie theaters as of the 1960s. It took 2 years to map out all of the movie theaters in France. We are now in an era that has completely changed, but that just goes to show their statistical efforts that go back for a while. I'd like to talk about what we do in France to measure VOD broadcasting. We have an observatory to measure video on demand. What we include in VOD, there's free VOD and paying VOD. Among free VOD, we have websites such as YouTube, Dailymotion. We also have Catch-Up TV. And in paying VOD, we have 3 market segments: rental VOD, subscription VOD, SVOD, and finally the sale of files. In the observatory and in the program that we've set 10 years ago, we focus on these 4 market segments. We set this observatory to answer simple questions, to know what do we find on these VOD platforms, what type of contents are on these platforms, how do consumers watch these platforms, and what is the typical usage of citizens in France. For each question, we've established methodologies to produce statistics with different partners. Sometimes we use research centers. Sometimes we use the platforms themselves as partners in our studies. We've also conducted surveys among the population. My presentation will look at different research results. I'll go through them quickly. All these results are publicly available. Some were published as soon as last week. Then this will show you the large spectrum of statistics we have on video on demand. The number of programs in video on demand There are not only films, but also TV programs and adult programs. That's the main type of programs that we find on the general platforms. There are some platforms that are targeted for adult programming. That's 20% of the offering. 38% of TV programs and films. We are mostly interested in films. In France, 15,000 films are available in VOD platforms, and this has strongly increased in the past 10 years. The number of films available on VOD were multiplied by 5. We also look at the nature of the films available. Is paying offerings. French films represent almost 30%. Our offering structure is stable. American films represent almost 44% of the offer. Then we will look at the consumption. But we have a first indicator for the offering. Another analysis that we're interested in is to follow the life of movies in the digital era in these different markets. This is a simple indicator, which is the availability rate of movies. 100% of movies that are released in movie theaters are available in movie theaters. Then we look at the portion of movies that are released in theaters that are available as VOD, but also physical videos, paying TV, and also free TV. We can see there's a reduction in physical videos, and there's an increase of video on demand. Another axis that we look at is the number of films that are available in these different markets. We have different combinations possible. The film is released in movie theaters. It can be created as a VOD, released as a DVD or not. It can be available on pay TV or not. It could be available on public TV or not. And then there's also the release as VOD. So we look the number of movies that are available in these various pathways of release. And this allows us to follow the life of movies. And we can see some areas where some films are released in theaters and not released in the other platforms. And we can see also films that are released on all of the platforms. You might wonder, what are the films present in different market segments? This is a type of analysis we do for VOD. There are many criteria. To present a few, we'll look according to the nationality of the film, according to their genre, according to the number of releases in movie theaters. Are they blockbusters? Are they mid-size releases? We also look at small-size releases, where we look at the blockbusters that will all be released as a video on demand, and the more there are box office entries, the faster they will be available in video on demand. And we'll also look for French films analysis according to their financing structure, which we only know for French films and not for foreign films. This is an example of analysis that we conduct. Now, in terms of consumption of video on demand, in France, this market has progressed strongly in 2015. It's a smaller market than movie theaters. Our physical market, which is near to 700,000 euros, that is. Let's look at the markets that are developed the most in France now, which is video on demand through subscription with the arrival of Netflix at the end of 2014, which gave a new breath to the market of video on demand. And we will look at the sales, depending on the category of film and the program category. Most of the market is based on a movie sales, and among these movies, American films generate more than half of the sales. French films also have 30% of market shares, which is equivalent to the offering. But foreign films, which are not French nor American, are underperforming in the video-on-demand market. generally speaking. We also look at the sales of TV programming in VOD. The genre that is the most successful is fiction, which makes up the largest part of TV programming in video on demand. Video on demand usages. Do we frequently consume video on demand? Do we frequently consume catch-up TV? Catch-up TV is free. We see a penetration rate that is a lot higher. 3/4 of the French population will consume catch-up TV. A little bit more than a third will pay video on demand to have access to TV programming or films. Surveys also allow us to position the different platforms among each other. You can see in red, we've put platforms that aren't in France but evolve in the French market. Netflix is based in the Netherlands. Google Play neither is in France, and iTunes. And we could see these American platforms. Netflix, in a year and a half, became the third largest platform. And the large French platforms, Orange, MyTF1, and Canal Play, are able to resist to competition nonetheless. Catch-up TV is we do something uniquely in France to measure catch-up TV in France. In France, catch-up TV is a real success. Once a program has been aired on TV, it is possible to watch the rerun as catch-up TV. We look at what is the portion of TV programming available. Almost 90% of TV programs are available as catch-up TV. It's available for historical channels. We have an availability rate that is a little bit lower for the new channels of TNT. And this is related to some copyright issues. But we have an increase of the smaller, newer TV channels. We have an increase of the offering. 17,000 hours of TV programming is available per month, which is a significant offering, with programs that are not necessarily recent. We also look at the date of release of the TV program. The first date of release of the TV program, 64% of the programs in catch-up TV were released more than 30 days before. Why would you watch weather programming 2 years ago? Well, if maybe a member of your family was interviewed on the Weather Channel and you'd like to see that excerpt, you can find it in catch-up TV, and it's free of charge. And then you can send the link to your entire family, for example. Those are some of the possibilities of catch-up TV. We have a lot of streaming programming, which is higher than stock programming. Consumption of catch-up TV has increased a lot. There's 5 billion videos seen, which is completely normal because it's free and it's legal. If you've missed an episode of your favorite TV program or a contest such as The Voice, you can always watch the replay under catch-up TV. And also some TV series such as the popular TV program called La Vie, France. And when the program is no longer available as catch-up TV, they're also ready to pay for to watch the rerun. What are the target audiences for catch-up TV? Young people mainly. This practice is more and more intense. More and more French people watch catch-up TV, and more frequently. And finally, we can see that the terminals that are used for catch-up TV have evolved. There's a drop of using computers. There's an increase of using televisions for catch-up TV. People will watch catch-up TV on their smart TV with their remote control. We'll also have a development with mobile terminals. People watch catch-up TV on tablets and also on smartphones. Thank you very much for your attention. You can find all these statistics on our website or in our report that was released last week. And we haven't made up these figures. We've really measured them. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Benoit. So we have about 20 minutes for questions. So I'll invite you to ask questions. There's a microphone circulating in the room. Somebody has to break the ice. Benoît Allaire, Observatoire de la culture et des communications. I have two questions. I have a question for Mark. I'd like to know, for the surveys you're carrying out regarding cultural products demand, you didn't mention the survey regarding the consumption of the households. And I also had a question for Benoît Allaire. In your graph, you quote often some sources, and especially data coming from GfK. So I was wondering, how can you retrieve that information? Do you have a specific partnership that allows you to have access to those data? It was just out of curiosity to know how you're functioning. Mark, maybe, to begin.
So just to the question there regarding the survey tools that we're using with households and with individuals, the Canadian Internet Use Survey is done as a hybrid survey, so we do get household characteristics in terms of the type of internet connection that's used. And then we go into an individual module where we would ask about particular activities at that time.
Thanks.
Alors comme vous le savez, en France, on est...
As you know, in France, we are grand chef, right? So we're expert in kitchen and practical things. So we rely on several sources. We actually collaborate with GfK as far as the follow-up of the supply of on-demand and its consumption. 10 years ago, we were collecting directly the information of supply from the platforms, the main French platforms, but it became too heavy to manage on a daily basis. So we've asked the platform to transfer those data for the supply, to transfer all that to GfK as part of a partnership, even though we're paying GfK for doing that. So each week, the main platforms send out files that show the supply. So it relates to consumption, but once. That's why we're talking about active consumption. Then we have NPA that negotiated with the ads associations that also sell some ad spaces, and they to convey information on the level of consumption. The platforms also send out information on the level of consumption. Not all. There are two among those that I quoted. Two on the aspect we have no information from Netflix, and for iTunes we don't get any type of information. However, those two segments of the market are not the main one. So in all the transactional exchanges, we get information on the main platforms. And for the platforms where we don't have any information, we are working with those who manage the rights, for example, for Netflix or iTunes. So roughly that's the way we operate. We do not cover all the segments of market. We have a coverage between 93% and 12%, but 12% is really for smaller segments of markets. For the larger ones, we have quite a good coverage, so that gives us a good visibility. Thank you. Dominique Jutras from the Observatoire. I wanted to ask Fabien and Alexandre a question regarding the surveys or the studies that you're carrying out. You mentioned 4 conclusions, and I was wondering the share of the national products on the Brazil market. Did you look at this aspect in your survey? Because I understood that there were some issues, but do you have any elements of data on that question, the share of the Brazil market? And also I was wondering, what are you covering? Do you only do focus groups, or is there a nationwide scale survey that you're producing in Brazil? And I also had a question for Monsieur Dana regarding Netflix, a question. Because we see that Netflix seems to be among the important players in France. But if we try to summarize all the tables that you showed us, does Netflix play an important role, and do you think that you can get important figures regarding that universe of Netflix and that new player on the French scale?
Thank you for your question. From the perspective, we are now conducting two phases of the survey. So we do have a focus groups qualitative phase that was already collected in 2016. In 2017, we are planning to do a national sample survey, representative survey on with a model of cultural consumption. So we plan to have both methodologies and to complement each other. And in the qualitative phase, you do not have yet a national measurement of national versus foreign content in Brazil. We do have some other survey in the country, especially on the audiovisual environment, that are quite similar to other countries, since the American production is much more important than in this kind of platform. But we don't have this specific data about Brazil, but we are planning to have that on 2017 to complement the data on diversity, especially on these platforms.
Just to complement, as we all know, measuring cultural content on the web is not easy in terms of, it's easier in terms of collecting data with citizens, but not easy for the supply side, because we have a problem. In fact, we started to plan this survey from a demand from the National Minister of Culture and the national regulatory agents on audiovisual in the country 2 years ago. And why it took so long to start collecting data? Because we have a lack of official frame from which we can select the sample in terms of a cultural establishment offering cultural content. And this poses a problem of coverage, because we have a lot of informal activities in the country. Not every cultural establishment is officially registered in the census of the National Statistical Office, and also some large corporations, the way they self-report their economic activities, the large economical firms, not necessarily will lead to cultural activities directly. So there is two problems of coverage: the lack of official data and the way they report their activity that may not be directly classified as a cultural establishment. So this is two problems. And this one, we are going to conduct the supply side based on standards for business surveys. So we are going to adapt the indicators, but all the methodology comes from the business survey methodology set forth by UNCTAD. We are going to adapt. And for the demand side, as Fabio has mentioned, we are going to design a specific model on the ICT standalone household survey with indicators for consumption of cultural content on the web. Thank you.
Peut-être, Philippe. Oui. Il y avait juste peut-être pour répondre à la question sur Netflix.
This is just to answer to your question about Netflix. Netflix in France, and Netflix is a video service by subscription, and that service represents 26% of VOD in France. And we believe that Netflix is covering half of that VOD market. So 13% of the total market of video on demand. Keeping in mind that they progressed very fast, but the main market in France is on box. It's 80% of the market. And Netflix is only present on one box because the access providers refused the financial conditions that were proposed by Netflix in terms of using the bandwidth. So we don't know exactly all the details, but they weren't able to find an agreement on that. So what Netflix was asking for wasn't convenient to the French operators on economic ground. So today they have a dominant position on the iSVOD market, but a quarter of the market of VOD market. And they're faced with the presence of Canal+, that has a very strong position. If we look at the replay of Canal+, it's very close to SVOD, so you can watch at any time all the movies that were offered by Canal+. So of course it's not the same rates, but in terms of supply, I have a premium type of offer. I have an exclusive offer, and you cannot find that in Netflix because there's a chronology of medias in France that is such that Netflix movies are 36 months old. So only the series of Netflix are exclusive, and Netflix invested in France only in one series, Marseille. So 8 episodes. Once I watch them, I can watch them for the first month for free, and then I just unsubscribe. So it's an audience that is attracted to US series, a young public, but there's a lot of volatility. I showed you there's an average, a yearly average, but if you look at the monthly average, you see that it's not regular because the first month is for free. I subscribe, then I am subscribed, then I'm back to subscribing. I don't know about you, but you can be subscribed, you can subscribe to Netflix for 6 months for free, basically. Forget what I've said anyway.
Bonjour, Paul-Éric Mosseret.
Paul-Éric Mosseret from CESA in Belgium. I'd like to thank Monsieur Dana for his very interesting presentation and, well, almost exclusive to European market. I'd like to know your perspectives of visibility on the first box, that is the piece of free platforms. Did you begin? Did you start reflecting on that? I imagine you did so, but I'd like to know your appreciations in terms of possible visibility of certain volume of consumption and availability of some TV programs, considering the importance of those platforms that are almost the first ones, YouTube, Dailymotion, and maybe later on we'll talk about the music platforms as well. Well, the consumption on YouTube is even higher in terms of penetration compared to the catch-up TV. Now today, YouTube platform, well, there are existing tools in France, like elsewhere, with Médiamétrie, that have a panel of consumers, and they have softwares installed on different terminals to follow the consumption. However, we have technical problems that cannot allow us to follow the nature of the content that is consumed on YouTube. Those are technical problems, however, so I'm sure that one day we'll be able to improve the visibility of what is used or consumed on YouTube or Dailymotion. Today, technically, it's not possible, really due to technical limitations. On the side of YouTube, it's not a problem because it's in their interest to show that they're leaders, there are a million people consuming their programs, so it's in their interest. But then there are technical issues that should be solved, but it might take still a while to fix them. But yes, those are things that we're trying to master better. But for the time being, we're not there yet. And we're heading towards progresses in that sense. Marcel Perrault from SODEC. I had 3 questions for the people from Statistics Canada. My first question is on the satellite account. There was a publication based on data of 2010. Now, how many updates do you intend to do and at what frequency so that we can follow up that? My second question was about the future of this account in times where there's a lot of hybridation between sectors, technology and culture. Now the concept of cultural satellite will survive, or will it go in a different direction? And then a third question regarding the surveys and companies. Are there any possibilities in the statistic tool, financial tool? Will it be possible to isolate the cultural sectors so that we can get more indicators in terms of financial health of cultural industries in Canada?
C'est vrai, notre premier compte satellite, c'est sur l'année de référence 2010. Cette année, on travaille sur l'année référence 2012 et ça va être diffusé, j'imagine, juin prochain, 2017. Le plan maintenant, c'est de faire un update, une mise à jour chaque 2 ans. Et entre les 2 années, on va publier des indicateurs de la culture. Et de ça, demain, c'est la première fois qu'on sort les Provincial Territorial Culture Indicators de 2010 à 2014. Et c'est 8h30 demain matin. So, tout le monde? Hey, je ne peux pas. De qu'est-ce qu'on va faire avec les industries de creativity? Ça, on ne sait pas certain encore. Il faut vraiment faire cette mise à jour de 2012. Toujours, ça va être discuté avec nos partenaires et vraiment qu'est-ce que l'industrie veut. On veut être relevant, je m'excuse, hein, ça bouge. On veut demeurer relevant et c'est vraiment où on va aller.
In terms of your questions about the culture sector, isolating them, For the industry surveys, we do, we categorize all the companies in Canada in terms of their industry, according to the North American Industry Classification. So as far as we can define it in that classification system, then we can divide it into, or provide data for that. Of course, if we want more detailed, so for the NAICS classification system, we have, the 2-digit NAICS all the way down to the 6-digit NAICS. That if we want more detailed information on the 6-digit NAICS, we obviously have to increase the sample size and sample at that level as well. So there is a possibility of that. But right now we're trying to work with the Standards Division in Statistics Canada to revise the industry classification so we can capture all the industry, all the companies that, for example, as I mentioned, the newspaper publishers in one, when we survey them, will be in one industry rather than separating them just because they have changed their method. So that's something that we're working on.
Une ou deux autres questions?
We still have time for a couple of questions. Geneviève Béliveau, Conseil des Arts et des Lettres du Québec, had a question about the culture satellite account. I'd like to understand a little bit better what is the role of the non-profit sector in cultural production, for example, orchestre symphonique or national or theaters or centers of cultural production. Do you integrate them as industries, and will they be part of that satellite account? What is the place of artistic production of national theaters or symphonic orchestra or centers of production for visual arts? What the role or place would be? Well, they will all be included, because when we're talking about satellite account, we have different fields. We have basically 6 large fields, and then we have sub-fields. Audiovisual that are covered. We have also handicraft. And it might be that the smaller ones, or the people who, for example, produce soaps in a very small artistic, touristic area, if it's not covered in our data through the surveys or by the administrative data, then it's going to be difficult to find them, cover them. But we try to make sure that we really capture them all in our system. I don't know if it answered.
On a répondu à la question?
Did it answer to your question?
Pas d'autres questions?
Any other questions? My name is Serena Kiri, working for the UNESCO Statistical Institute. When you were talking about the use of the new audiences, you talked of an amount of 7,000 to 10,000 euros for the organization of the theaters. And did you explore the possibility of the open theaters outside the theaters? Because that could also be an opportunity that asks less investment. It's been working pretty well in the 60s in Canada and in the United States as well, so why not? I think it is a possibility to give a new thrust to the movies. I do not know the Cinepark that you're talking about, but I'll make the researches. And but it's really a matter of presenting it at an interesting scale after experimenting it. Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank you, and I thank all our guests as well. Thank you, because you were a perfect panel. You stick to your time and you had a lot of content. So we'll be taking a break now and back here at 11 o'clock.